everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Eternal X Wolfpack Paranormal. I am your host, Shawn Ellis, and tonight we have an amazing guest, and her name is Miss Sylvia Schultz. She is an author and a paranormal investigator. She's also linked with the Heart of Illinois Center for Unexplained Phenomenons, and we're going to sit here and talk to her tonight. So let's bring on Miss Sylvia.
Hello.
How you doing tonight?
Fantastic. How about yourself?
I'm a little under the weather. I'm battling a sinus infection, so I'm kind of tongue-tied and a little debabbled here tonight. So
we'll get through this together.
We're going to have to excuse me if I get a little twisted here tonight. It's like, what the heck? But, oh, well. So, Miss Sylvia, can you explain a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So I have been a paranormal investigator for about 16 years now, and I have been writing books of paranormal nonfiction for about that same amount of time. It was when I was writing my first book of true ghost stories, Ghosts of the Illinois River, that I was invited to take part in a paranormal investigation, and I realized, oh my goodness, people actually go out and do this. This is wonderful. I'm in.
That's cool.
Yeah, I've always loved true ghost stories, and it never occurred to me that somebody has to go out and collect these stories. And I realized, well, it might as well be me.
True. Did you, when you were younger or growing up, did you have any strange things happen to you that led you down to this field?
No, I never experienced anything myself, but I had a father who was a huge reader and taught me to be a huge reader too. And he was also very interested in ghost stories, and he is my origin story. He's the one who got me interested in the paranormal and the weird and the strange and mysterious. I grew up in the Chicago area, so my father would tell these stories at the dinner table about Resurrection Mary and the Screaming Mummy of the Field Museum and the Ghosts of St. James the Sag and all these wonderful Chicago area ghost stories. That's what I was raised on.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Have you ever got a chance to go investigate any of the places he talked about?
Yeah. He told me a little bit about Bachelor's Grove Cemetery, and I've been there a couple of times and have gotten to investigate there. And I've always loved going to the Field Museum. I've never been to the field on an investigation. And he never really told me about anything involving the Museum of Science and Industry, but that's another one of my favorite places to go. And that I have actually been investigating on the down low at the MSI, or the museum formerly known as the MSI. Apparently it's changed its name. But one of the things I wrote about in the first volume of Gone on Vacation was the U-505, the submarine there. And I remember seeing this as a kid, and I actually brought a copy of Gone on Vacation with that cover. Quick little side note. I brought that book with that cover to the museum just to show people in the gift shop and say, hey, this is a cool book that's come out and your museum is in it. And I got into conversation with a security guard who works on the U-505. And he recognized the subject of the cover immediately. So one of the cool things about the Museum of Science and Industry is that it is housed in the last remaining building of the Columbian World's Exposition in 1893, 1892, thereabouts. And there was one building left after the whole thing folded its tents and stole away into the night, and that is the building that now houses the MSI.
Oh.
So this guy who worked at the museum noticed, and the other cool thing about the Columbian Exposition is that the Ferris wheel was invented for that World's Fair.
Mhm.
So that is a picture on the cover of the very first Ferris wheel that was ever invented. And he recognized that. He's like, oh my gosh, that's Jackson Park. This is the first Ferris wheel. And that's exactly right.
Cool.
So we both got a real big kick out of that. So he told me a couple of stories about experiences he had had on the U-505. He's a big World War II buff anyway. So he's just like the perfect person to be a security guard there. He was talking about some woman came up to him and said, does the museum have holograph technology? I mean, it's a perfectly valid question. I mean, this is a science museum, obviously, you know, it's quite possible. And he's like, well, it depends. What did you see? And she said that she was looking at the submarine and she saw someone up on the top of the submarine in the conning tower. That it was a guy. He was wearing a dark uniform and he had yellow insignia on his sleeves. Mm-hmm. And the security guard thought about it for just a moment or two, and he realized that the apparition that this woman saw, because it was not a hologram, it was a full body apparition, the lucky girl, it was the apparition of Captain Dan Gallery, who was the captain responsible for the capture of the U-505. He led the task force with the USS Chatelaine that found the U-505 and depth charged her and brought her to the surface and ended up boarding her and capturing her.
Wow, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, super fun.
I've actually seen some of the holographic stuff down in Springfield when we were down in some of the museums down there.
Yeah.
It's unreal. You'd think they're right in front of you behind that glass wall or that mirror they got. And it's got like President Washington or whatever, walking behind those screens. And it looks like he's just walking through a room.
And
amazing.
It's
like unreal. And I'm like, because at first you never realized it was actually a hologram until the very end. You just thought it was glassed off stage the way it was, and the people were performing behind it, so they could have their mics and everything. Yeah. But everything just disappeared after it was all said and done.
Wow.
It was the craziest thing you ever seen, and I thought it was cool. I happened to go with my daughter on a field trip down there when I seen that, and we were like, because we were trying to debate if it was actually a real person standing there or not. And it ended up being a hologram from what they had down there in that museum. And it was pretty awesome.
That's amazing. Is that the new Lincoln Museum?
Yeah.
Cool. I've been meaning to get there, and now I have even more incentive to get there. The British are really good at holograms, too. I went to England and Scotland for 3 weeks ghost hunting a couple of years ago, and their hologram technology is just mind-blowingly cool. Hey, Christy.
Yeah. Hello, Chris Mack and Christy Rico. But yeah, I mean, they said, Walt Disney was, the inspiration behind some of those holograms was especially with the robotics that they pulled back in the days,
Yeah.
So, but yeah, holographic projection. And I've even read stories, during it might have been World War I or World War II, where the Germans were firing upon something above the sky, and they thought they were firing and wasted a lot of their ammo trying to shoot something down, and come to find out there wasn't nothing there.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Wow. That is cool.
About that. It was a pretty interesting story on that, too.
There was one of the museums we went to in England was the Museum of Haunted Objects in Nottingham, Robin Hood territory. And they had this museum is several floors tall. And on the second floor, they had like a doll room that was made up to look like the island of the dolls down in South America. but on one wall they had 3 portraits, and it was like the Harry Potter portraits where the portraits interacted with each other. There was an old man, there was a young, beautiful young lady, there was a little girl, and the old man would come and walk behind the young lady and slip a garrote around her neck and strangle her.
Wow.
The little girl would walk over to the old man's portrait and stab him in the back. It was just the coolest thing.
Wow.
I have an odd idea of what's cool, but you know.
Everybody's got a twisted sense of humor, even I do.
We weren't allowed to film or take pictures in the museum. I was lucky enough that I had the girl at the gift shop counter. She was allowed to come with me and give me a tour of the museum, and I was allowed to record it sound wise.
Right.
And I made a Lights Out, a podcast episode of it. But yeah, we weren't allowed to film in there. I would have loved to have just stood there for 15 minutes through this entire cycle of what the portraits do and just film that so I could watch it again.
Yeah, especially some of those, well, I should say this is like when we were growing up, you'd always see these portraits on the wall of a face, the portrait itself of the face. But if you walk by, it looks like the eyes were following you.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do that with kind of a different tech thing too. And that's interesting to do. I've always wanted to put one together because I can actually draw. So I'd actually wanted to draw one, make it for myself and stick it on the wall just so when people walk by, it actually looks like it's following you. There's a method to the mad for that picture, but
yeah, there is I've never really studied art, but I know there is a technique. If you paint or draw the eyes as though they're looking right at you, that from some weird optical illusion, the gaze will follow you. That's how they make it, so that the gaze follows you around the room. And
they've also got it, where if you actually make it like a triangle pyramid form, not realizing it, but the eye's still looking at you because it's still together and it's at the peak of the pyramid, and looking down. So then when you go one way, it looks like the whole eyes followed you. If you go the other way, it looks like the whole eyes followed you too. But if you go back to the front, it's still straight on.
Oh, wow.
But it's like, because the way it's made at an angle and you don't realize you drew it at that angle. So it gives it a little bit of bizarre things for it. That's definitely sure. So you're a big history buff, right?
I am. Oh, yes.
Is that what inspired you, beside your father, to write your books?
Yeah, I've always loved history. And when I started doing the paranormal investigation, I realized how important it is to know that history, because that's the reason we have the stories, is these historical events that happened. And they could be, somebody really super important like Abraham Lincoln, or they could be just some person who is living their life and their experience was perfectly valid too. Their experience ended up being a ghost story. So I've always really been fascinated by that human connection, and the human connection in history for me translated into the human connection trying to communicate with somebody on the other side of the veil. It's all just interconnected. And I think it's fascinating.
Very interesting. That's definitely interesting. Now, I know you're linked with the Heart of Illinois Center for Unexplained Phenomena, which is
yes.
David and Doc and the rest of the guys. You guys have been on the show before. So being out on an investigation and knowing some of this knowledge, of the history of this place, because I know you like to look it up. Do you think it influences your idea or your thoughts when you actually go on an investigation to locations?
I think it does, and I can absolutely appreciate the fact that some people, especially people with sensitivities to that, I appreciate the fact that some people like to go in cold and not know anything about the history or the background of a place. I personally prefer to know the history because I feel that you are better able to tailor your questions to an entity during an EVP session if you know something about their background. If you're talking to a farmer, you're not going to be talking about the science experiments they're doing. If you're talking to somebody who is really interested in classic cars, you're not going to be talking about cooking. They're
Right.
not going to be interested in answering your questions. But if you get onto a topic that you know that they were probably interested in life, you're much more apt to get a conversation going. So yes, I believe that it does influence me a little bit, but I see that as a plus, not a minus.
We have a question here from Christy. Maybe I don't know anything about this. It says, did
Yes.
the government really exhume Abraham Lincoln's grave?
Yes, they did a couple of times just to make sure that he was there. Very shortly after, I think this was I want to say the 1870s, there was an attempt to steal Lincoln's body.
Really?
And yeah, and the thieves did an absolutely ham-handed job of it. And if there's anyone listening who has more details, just feel free to hop in the chat and correct me. That's perfectly fine. But yeah, it was like 3 or 4 guys that wanted to steal Lincoln's body and take it to the South and have the government ransom it back. Apparently, yes, he was. I'll talk about that in a second. So these guys decided to break into the tomb and steal the body, and they hired another guy to help them as a lookout. And unbeknownst to them, he actually worked for the Secret Service or something like that. He actually worked for the government, so he completely narked them out, and they didn't get very far at all with this body. But yeah, they did make sure that they opened the coffin, make sure he was still there. He was still very well preserved because their embalming was still kind of in its infancy during the Civil War, but the technology grew by leaps and bounds because, especially if an officer fell on the field, that they wanted to be able to bring that body back and have it buried in a family plot if they fell in battle far from home. So they really did a good job, as best they could at the time, in preserving these bodies. And this was the President of the United States, was the first president to be assassinated. So they really went all out. And also during his death tour, he lay in state in several American cities. So they really wanted him to be presentable by the end of that tour. So they really took pains to preserve him as best they could. There is one photograph that there's exactly, yeah, he looked great for a deceased man. There are several photos that purport to be Lincoln in death. Most of them are fake, but there is one that one of the honor guards, who was somebody pretty high up in the Union Army, took a picture of it, or it was a senator or something like that, took a picture, and you can tell by the people standing around him who were there at the time and by the way the body looks, that's definitely Lincoln. That is the picture of Lincoln. So yeah, when they buried him again after the theft attempt, one of the people that was invited to look at Lincoln's body in the coffin was his son Robert. So he definitely did identify this body in the casket as Lincoln. I think the government exhumed him one more time. I want to say it was in the 1920s or 30s. And just to make sure he was there. And then after they took a look at him, and he was still in pretty good shape, even by then, like 50, 60 years later. After that, they poured a concrete slab over the coffin, and he's not being moved again. He's not being messed with again. They did encase him in concrete, so he's not going anywhere. But yeah, they're.
What was the actual point of digging him up originally? The guys that was trying to do it to begin with.
Oh, they wanted to steal his body and hold it for ransom. They wanted the government to pay to get him back.
That's kind of morbid.
Very, very, but yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if I'd want to pay to get somebody's body back, especially if it's
right. I mean, he's not using it anymore. I mean,
right. I mean, it's not like. I mean, I know he's a part of history, but okay.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, there's. I mean, that's about the best souvenir you can have. There was somebody dug up John Hancock and cut off his right hand so they could have the hand that signed the Declaration of Independence. I mean, that's a heck of a souvenir.
Wow.
It's not like he was using that hand anymore, so you know.
Well, I mean, I've heard people.
Head too. The
I mean, I've heard people digging up graves to steal their jewelry and the gold caps out of their teeth. And
yeah.
I've heard that before, but to literally cut off somebody's hand just because they wrote the wow.
Yep. Truth.
That is just bizarre.
Yeah. And they had a lot of body snatching going on in the Chicago City Cemetery too. When it was still a going concern as a city cemetery, before they dug everybody up and moved them to, well, not everybody, that's why it's so haunted. There was a lucrative trade in body snatching going on right around the beginning of the Civil War and just before the Civil War. And it was Alan Pinkerton who busted that body stealing ring. So, yeah, it was frowned upon to donate your body to science, and doctors needed practice cutting up bodies and studying human anatomy. So if you don't have bodies legally to do that, you pay somebody to go and dig up a fresh corpse and practice on that. That's how you get knowledge.
I just read an article, something about this, which Christy just said that's why humans are wanting to cast iron gates around when they die. Mm-hmm. But I think those iron gates are to actually keep the energy preserved inside the cemetery, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah, when we were in England, we saw quite a few graves that had kind of an iron cage over it, and we were like, "Oh God, that's kind of weird. Are they keeping a vampire in or what?" But yeah, it was partly to guard against grave robbing, and partly to guard against, partly to keep that energy in. It was a wonderful thing that we saw in Stevenage, a town called Stevenage outside London. And I'm not going to remember this fellow's name, but this guy died in the 1700s or so. And he had an absolute horror. I guess it must have been the early 1800s, because that's when the trade in body parts was really getting going. And he had an absolute horror of being dug up for parts. So he made his friends promise that they weren't going to bury him. So when he passed away, his friends were like, okay, this guy does not want to be buried, so we won't bury him. So they kept him in the rafters of a garage that was on the premises. So they put him in a lead-lined coffin, and they put the coffin in a crate, and they stuck the crate up in the rafters of this garage. And the garage is still there, and you can still see the bottom of this crate up in the rafters. And the door is kind of sagging a little bit. We couldn't get into the garage, but the door was kind of sagging, and there was a slit up at the top, a gap. And we put our cell phones in, and we were looking at everything, and I took a picture of it. But the sad thing is that during World War II, think it was World War II, there were some American soldiers that were stationed in the area, and they heard about this guy, and they went into the garage and broke into the crate and broke into the coffin and stole his bones as souvenirs. So if he had been buried properly, he
Yeah.
probably wouldn't have been messed with. Odds are he might not have been dug up for science. Instead, he was just used as souvenirs for Yankee soldiers. So in order to escape being dug up, he just fell victim to pilfering anyways.
Yeah. I mean, when I was growing up, there was a town close by called Knoxville, Illinois, and you can look this up.
The Knoxville Mummy!
Yep, the Knoxville Mummy. My best friends actually dated the girl.
Really?
That happened to. Yeah.
That happened very, very soon before I went to college in Monmouth. That's how I heard about it. It happened just right before I got to college.
Yep. He was dating that girl, and then we found out about that. And yeah, that was pretty bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely pretty bizarre. So let's get into your book here. You said this one was the first book you wrote, right?
Well, that's the first in the Gone on Vacation series. The very first book I wrote was Ghosts of the Illinois River. So
Okay.
that's an old book, but Gone on Vacation is much meatier than Ghosts of the Illinois River. It's has stories from all over the world. I was talking with a friend of mine several years ago at an event up in north of Chicago. And, Christy said, I've donated my body because I was born with a disease so I could change lives and get break. Oh, good for you. That is amazing. Good on you. My father donated his body to science, but they couldn't take it because he actually died of COVID. So, yeah. So unfortunately, he couldn't go through with that. But anyway, so I was talking with a friend of mine up north of Chicago, and she used to work at Brookfield Zoo, and she was telling me how the zoo was haunted. I said, what a wonderful idea for a book. It's writing about haunted zoos. Well, maybe that won't be long enough for an entire book.
Right.
Let's go ahead and expand that a little bit. And museums, of course, museums are haunted because of all the artifacts and stuff in them. And let's... How about amusement parks too? Yeah, that'll be fun. So haunted zoos, museums, and amusement parks. And then, thank you, Christy. Appreciate that. He is deeply missed. So I was on another podcast talking with this lovely English lady, and she was telling me about a historic village in England, in the Black Country, that is haunted. Telling me those stories. I thought it was a total facepalm moment. I was like, why didn't I think of historic villages? There's Lincoln's New Salem, there's Colonial Williamsburg, there's all these places. So I decided by the end of that conversation, I knew that I had to write a second book. So Gone on Vacation, Endless Summer came out of that conversation. Yeah, there we go. So even more places that you would go on vacation and find spooky things and just find a little bit of paranormal activity with
Can you tell me a little bit about what you discovered at the Chicago Museum or the zoo, Chicago Zoo?
Sure, yeah. So we can absolutely talk about the Chicago City Cemetery. It started off in the 1830s when Chicago started growing and people started moving to Chicago and living there and dying there. So they needed some place to bury all these folks. So City Cemetery came into being. And this was really a microcosm of Chicago society. There were paupers buried there. There were people that could only afford just a wooden tombstone or a wooden marker for their graves. There were people on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. There were middle-class people galore. And then there were the highest echelon. And granite stones, and they had mausoleums galore. And it was really just this cross section of Chicago society. But after a while, when City Cemetery got more and more and more burials in it, the city fathers looked at it and said, it might not have been the best idea for us to put this burial ground right next to Lake Michigan, the city's water supply. Like, okay, well, let's put together a few more cemeteries and we'll move the bodies. During the Civil War, Camp Douglas was up in the Chicago area, and about 3,000. Sorry about that.
That's all right, because Guardian's back there raising
I know who it is, and I'm not going to answer it. They put together Rose Hill Cemetery and Graceland Cemetery in Chicago, kind of further inland, and started moving bodies. And during the Civil War, there were about 3,000 Confederate prisoners of war at Camp Douglas that passed away and were buried in City Cemetery. So they started moving bodies right before the Civil War, and the war kind of put a damper on those plans. But after the war, they continued moving bodies, and they had gotten the project rolling. But then October 8th, 1871 happened, the Chicago fire. People tried to get refuge from the flames in the city cemetery. They thought, well, there aren't any buildings there. I mean, we'll be perfectly safe from the flames as long as we can make it to the cemetery. But what they didn't count on was the fact that the flames were so intense that the conflagration followed people into the cemetery.
Getting a little bit of glitching going on here.
Obliterated all those wooden markers of the poor folks. They the moisture in the granite and marble headstones boiled because of the flames.
Oh, wow.
So all these beautiful rich people monuments exploded from the pressure. So there were shards of granite and marble littering the ground. So people waded into the waters of Lake Michigan to finally get relief from the flames. And then the flames died down, and the city fathers looked around at the wreckage of City Cemetery, and they're like, we have no idea who's left underground. It's estimated there are about 20,000 people still there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they turned it into Lincoln Park, a very Tony area of town.
Hey, Tim Dills.
Yeah. Hey, Tim. So, yeah, they built Lincoln Park over it, a very rich, very nice area of town. But when they were digging the cellars for these mansions, there are people high up in Chicago society that wrote in their memoirs, I'm like, yeah, when I was a little girl, they were building our house and they're digging the cellar and they kept digging up bodies. And it was frankly quite horrifying. And the servants wouldn't stay because the servants figured the house is automatically haunted. And then after a while, they put Lincoln Park Zoo there. There's also the fact that, all right, this is an adult show. I feel okay talking about this. One of the high points, one of the landmarks in Lincoln Park was a place. I don't remember the original name of it, but it was a bridge, very, very beautiful, tall bridge, and you could stand there and look to the south, and you could see Jackson Park. You could see, and this is in the 18.
Yeah, we got computer gremlins a little bit glitching here a little bit.
Tourists to come to the World's Fair, you could see that. You could see Jackson Park from Lincoln Park. But the thing about this bridge was it very quickly got the nickname Suicide Bridge because there were plenty of people that walked to the top of the bridge and then took the quick way down.
Oh, wow.
And this being the Victorian era, where they had a much easier relationship with death than we do today, people would bring picnic lunches out and just wait for somebody to take a swan dive off the top of the
Oh,
bridge. And yeah, it was just all in a Sunday afternoon. So yeah, that's
man.
also contributes to Lincoln Park being extremely haunted. So yeah, if you go to the zoo, you are very likely to get photobombed by apparitions of people in Victorian dress.
Oh, now I'm gonna have to go down to the zoo. Last time I was down there at the Chicago Zoo is when my kids were probably 10 and 7.
Uh-huh.
Now I'm definitely gonna have to go check that out.
Yeah.
I mean, has the zoo ever had any claims of apparitions tormenting the animals or causing problems with the animals there?
Not as such, but I I talked to a fellow that shared a very, very strange story with me. He lives up in the he lives up in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and he is a paranormal enthusiast, an investigator, and he brought his daughter down for a birthday celebration. They went to Chicago. And they're like, hey, Lincoln Park Zoo, it's free to get in. This is great. And they had a cabbie who was driving them around. And he's like, your dog. And he says that he and his daughter walked up to the elephant cage or the elephant enclosure rather. And there was a cow elephant that was very, very interested in his daughter. Jerry Ayers was this guy's name. I don't remember his daughter's name offhand, but this elephant cow was very interested in Jerry's daughter, and she leaned up against the fence of the enclosure and was like pushing on it, and the metal of this fence was starting to strain. So Jerry's like, let's go look at some different animals. And they went to the gorilla enclosure, and there was a male gorilla that came right up to the fence, and he's looking at Jerry's daughter, and he's just looking at her, and just really, really interested. And they're like, okay, this is just starting to get weird. And they walked past the elephant enclosure again on their way out of the zoo. And this cow came back up to the fence and was like leaning her chest against the fence, almost trying to get at the two of them. And they're like, yeah, that was just plain strange. That's very weird.
Maybe an energy phenomenon.
It may have been. I'm not sure. Jerry has never been able to explain that. The only other thing I've heard about is that there is a female apparition in Victorian dress that hangs out in the women's restroom at the lion enclosure, the lion house. So if you go to Lincoln Park Zoo, check out the lion house.
Definitely so. That's definitely interesting. And I wonder if it happens at a certain time or certain time of the day or night or.
Not sure. I think it's one of those things where if you're paying attention and you're open to it, you can experience it any time during the day. It was in the early.
Yeah, we're having a little bit of glitching tonight for some reason.
Or the children's. Oh, there we go. Dropped out for a second. They built a gigantic barn for the farm animals, and in digging the foundation for the barn, they dug up several more bodies, and the zoo director was like, oh, let's just put these over here. Nothing to see here. It's all good. We didn't discover anything. Let's just pour this foundation and continue with construction. It's all good.
I noticed I had an investigation in Pekin, Illinois, and at one of my teammates' houses. She was having some issues there, and we discovered that Pekin, Illinois, is actually most of Pekin is buried on top of cemeteries.
Mm-hmm. Yep, the Schnucks in Pekin. It used to be a grade school, and the grade school was built on top of a cemetery. Yeah.
Yeah. When we started digging into the history of that, and it's like, your house may be sitting on a partial cemetery. And she's like,
Yeah.
oh, great.
Yeah. Lots of coal mines in Pekin, too.
But yeah, Pekin's a very interesting place, especially
Ooh, yeah.
especially for investigations.
Yeah.
You also
And a
have,
serial killer working in Pekin, too. Yeah.
who was that?
That was, let me see if I can remember his name. Uh, he was, he preyed on young boys in, I want to say, the 1970s. And he had the reputation of being a train enthusiast. And it wasn't Steamboat Willie, it wasn't Boxcar Willie, but it was something Willie. And he would lure young boys in by taking them to the reputation of doing an impression of a steam train whistle. So that's why they called him something Willie. It was Railroad Willie, something like that. But he preyed on young boys.
Isn't there a few of those boys or in that area anyway that has to do with missing people that has never been found?
Yeah, I believe so. One of the Conover brothers wrote a book or did a documentary on this guy. And I myself was going to write, when I was still working in fiction, I was going to write a horror novel based on that situation. I started taking notes for it, but it never went any farther than that. But it was, yeah, this guy preyed on young boys and a serial killer right here in Pekin. So,
wow.
Yeah. Pekin is a very interesting place. They do the theater group every Halloween, or every October rather, does a kind of the Voices of the Past sort of thing from Pekin's history, because we have the wreck of the Columbia as well in the Illinois River just north of Pekin, right about where Creve Coeur is now. So yeah, lots of history in Pekin, lots of dark history in Pekin.
Yeah,
I love living there. History buff. I love living there.
Also, you have this book here as well.
Yeah. Grave Deeds and Dead Plots. That is the beginning of a series of true crime stories that have resulted in hauntings. So,
Christy said it's
there we
a
go.
boy
He did strangle him. Yeah.
And he strangled them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh boy, for Christy, for somebody who lives on
Yeah, Christy seems to be on the ball when it comes to certain things, for sure. You're glitching a little bit there, Sylvia.
Yeah, you glitched out a little bit too. I got that.
I'm wondering if the storm.
Circle of death.
I'm wondering if the storm's coming in, because I know we're supposed to get a thunderstorm tonight. I wonder if it's starting to cause a little havoc with some of the connections.
Could be.
For sure. So this book, what's some of the main topics in here that really stand out to you?
Oh boy. Well, with the Grave Deeds and Dead Plots series, the way I set the books up, this sort of happened this way. I've released 2 books in the series now, and each book has one great big long story and then a bunch of littler stories. So people, if they want just a couple of stories to read passing the time in the dentist's office, there you go. Just open it up and there's a couple pages and you're done. But the big story for the first volume is the Donnelly murders that happened in Ontario, Canada in 1880. I first found out about the Donnelly murders when I was working on my book, Days of the Dead. It's a ghost story for every single day of the year. And that's when I found out about it. And All it said in this article that I was reading was that the Donnellys were killed because their neighbors hated them. And I said, at the time, I lived next to somebody who I know loathed me. And I said, well, my neighbors hate me. I know there's more to the story than that.
Yeah.
So I started to do some research on it. And then it was this big rabbit hole, and it's really, really famous in Canadian history. And it is deeply, deeply fascinating. This whole story about the Donnelly family.
It never seems to fail when we have something good and we're
I'm trying to
talking about
encapsulate it in a nutshell, but there were Irish immigrants. James and Johanna Donnelly emigrated from Ireland and raised a big family on the frontier, on the Canadian frontier, what was then the frontier. And they squatted on 100 acres, and James farmed it, and Johanna helped him farm it, and they put effort into this into upgrading this 100 acres that they found themselves squatting on. And then they got sued by the actual owner of the land, and the judge decided that, well, they could have the southern 50 acres, but they had to give the northern 50 acres back. And James was not happy about that, because he was like, I've been working the entire plot for all this time, and I would like the entire 100 acres. There was this lawsuit, and he ended up, there was a barn raising, and the guy that lost the lawsuit attacked James with like a railroad spike, a hand spike. And James picked up something else and defended himself and killed this guy. And Johanna actually took in this guy's son and raised him as her own. The Donnellys had 6 boys and a girl, and she just added this guy's son to her passel of kids. James was found guilty of this murder, even though it was self-defense, and was sentenced to hang. Johanna went out and into the community and gathered signatures for a petition saying, please don't, oh, there you go, Willie Doherty. Please don't let my husband hang. I've got little kids at home. So his sentence was eventually commuted to 15 years in prison, something like that. And when he got out, his boys were running wild. They had grown up with pretty wild. There was a James, back in the old country, had been a stagecoach driver. So the oldest boy, Will Donnelly, decided to put together a stagecoach route with a couple of his brothers. And they became so popular that they were soon rivaling the government stage. And there was another stagecoach line that ran in about the same area called the Hawksbill line. And the Donnelly line ran the Hawksbill line out of business. So there was this huge competition between the stagecoach lines, and they were sabotaging wagons so that passengers were hurt. They were killing horses for the stagecoaches. Just this huge, huge feud going on, a stagecoach feud. And just also, everybody had it out for the Donnellys. There was a newspaper of the day that said, if a housewife baked a pie and put it out on her windowsill to cool and a dog stole it, it would be blamed on the Donnellys.
Oh, wow.
Not even making this up. It's just this story. And it ended up with the Donnellys. Oh, there was a fellow nicknamed Grouchy Ryder, and his barn burned down. And of course, everyone blamed it on the Donnellys. James and Johanna were at a wedding, and their boys were at a wedding too. They all had alibis, but everyone blamed them. So Grouchy decided to sue James Donnelly for the loss of his barn. So they were getting ready for court. Again, trying to do this in a nutshell. Reader's Digest condensed version. There was something called the Vigilance Committee that was a group formed basically to mess with the Donnellys. they got together and this once and for all. They do the Donnelly's house. Came into the Donnelly's house after everyone had gone to bed. There was a mob of like 30 or 40 guys, including the sheriff of the town. They broke into the house. They handcuffed Tom Donnelly, the youngest son, then woke him up and marched him into the kitchen. James woke up, came into the kitchen. Johanna Donnelly came down from her bedroom with a cousin, a niece of hers, Bridget. They all came down to the kitchen. They were like, what's going on? And Tom nodded to the sheriff and he said, he thinks he's smart. And James says, what have you got against us now? And the sheriff decided not to read the warrant. He was like, well, he didn't have a warrant. He was just acting on his own initiative here, along with this mob. And he basically said, kill them all. Wow. So James and Johanna were beat to death with shovels. They beat the family dog to death. Tom fought like a young bull to defend his family. He was still handcuffed. He made it all the way outside the front door, and he was met with a pitchfork to the chest, and the guy shoved him back into the kitchen. Wow. And got him down on the floor and just savaged him. Bridget ran up the stairs. There was a neighbor boy that was staying with them, Johnny O'Connell. He followed Bridget up the stairs. Bridget was running to this, what she thought was the safety of her bedroom. She didn't know he was there or just ignored him. Probably didn't know he was there. She slammed the door in his face. So he ran back down, hid under the bed in the front bedroom. That's how we know John only heard that. They killed Bridget, then came downstairs and they're like, she's no longer a threat. They've poured coal oil all over the house, including over the bed under which Johnny was quivering with terror, and they set the house on fire. And then they went looking for more Donnellys. They went a couple miles away to Wayland's Corners, where Will Donnelly lived. They really wanted Will Donnelly dead. He was generally agreed to be the smartest of the brothers, and he was a real threat. They saw him as a real threat to the community, so they wanted him dead. He had gone to bed just a couple hours before. His wife, Nora, was pregnant, and she had gone to bed before Will. So Will got into bed and he's like, move over. I want, move over. I want to get in my spot in the bed. And Nora was like, no, I'm warm here. I'm not going to move. Crawl over me. So Will crawled over his wife to get to his place in the bed. And that small concession to his wife's comfort probably saved his life. One of his other brothers was also in the house, staying the night. The mob went to Wayland's Corners, broke into Will's barn, led his prize stallion out, and was beating it to make it scream so that Will would come out. And they kept yelling, Will, fire, come on out, because they wanted him to come out. Will's brother, John, heard the commotion and went to the front door, opened it, and it turned out to be Nora's brother. Will's brother, John's chest full of buckets. Hole in the front, tore his lungs up, tore his groin apart, severed the femoral artery. And John dropped like a stone. Will and Nora and the other guy in the house dragged him into the kitchen. They were Catholic, so Nora got a piece of blessed candle and forced John's hand closed around the piece of blessed candle, and he bled out within 5 minutes. So here are these people that survived lying on the floor, just
Wow.
trying to survive the night. And when his brother's dead on the floor, so that the mob finally dispersed, and no one was ever brought to justice for this. They had Johnny's testimony. They tried the sheriff and a couple other guys, and the jury was like, we're not going to convict on the word of a 12-year-old boy. And one of the jury members said, well, it's the Donnellys. I wouldn't convict if I saw it happen myself.
Wow.
The community was just that much against the Donnellys. So it was just
crazy.
A wild, wild story.
That is crazy. That's worse than the Hatfields and the Mayweathers.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
just outrageous.
That's crazy.
So the ghost lore of that is that James and Johanna, the house was rebuilt. There were still several brothers. Will survived, of course, and there were several other brothers, and Jenny, the daughter, that were still alive. They rebuilt the house. The barn was still standing. And of course, the ghosts of James and Johanna and Will all haunt the land on which the house stood and was rebuilt, and which the barn still stands on. It is
evidently they don't want us to know what she's
saying. The horse will stop and balk and refuse to go any further. And if you insist, if you make the horse go past the house, it will in a couple of days. So that's the ghost lore of the Donnelly family. And they've heard people screaming in the barn, and all sorts of stuff.
I actually know somebody with the last name Donnelly. Now I'm going to have to ask them tomorrow if they're any relation to them.
Yeah, any relation to the Canadian Donnelly.
Yeah. Definitely so.
Yeah.
Okay, what's one place on your bucket list?
They didn't even do anything. They were just trying to live their lives. It's nutty how much the Donnellys were hated, and for no reason at all.
Yeah, just like
blows my mind.
It's just like he said right here. Who knew one family could cause so much hatred in a community?
Yeah. Through no fault of their own. Will, when the guy that put together the peace committee, the vigilance committee, was actually the pastor of one of the churches. And when he moved in, Will Donnelly actually sent him a letter. And Will was like, you're going to hear stories about my family. Meet us. Give us a chance. Let us introduce ourselves to you. And this pastor just refused to meet with them, just went on what he was hearing from the community. And he formed this vigilance committee, which ended up with 5 people dead and a house in flames.
Wow.
Just unreal.
So
that's why that is the centerpiece of the first Grave Deeds and Dead Plots book, because it's such a fascinating story.
I'm definitely going to check that one out for sure.
Yeah.
Because that definitely sounds interesting, especially the whole story about that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you probably dug into great detail of some of the other things that's involved with that as well.
Yeah. It's there have been books written about it, not just my article, but not just my one story, but books written about it. And and even in this telling, I'm leaving a lot of stuff out.
Well, Sylvia, we are at the top of the hour, and time has flown very quickly.
Oh, it has.
Yeah.
It feels like we've been talking for like 10 minutes.
Oh yeah, I know we had a few little glitches in there once in a while when you were trying to say something. I don't think the spirits wanted us to hear it. Gwen popped in for a second, and she was trying to tweak a few things, and
like right now you just froze up for a minute there.
Yeah,
your hologram glitched out.
But I definitely think there's a storm brewing in there because it's getting really dark over here in my area. So I think the storm's rolling in. So one question I do got to ask you before you go.
Yeah.
What is one place on your bucket list that you want to go to?
Ooh, oh gosh, there are so many. Oh, well, I would really love to spend more time at 30 East Drive. Um, I would love to go back to Warwick Castle in England and do a proper investigation. I've been to Warwick Castle twice, but both times I was there, it was before I was a paranormal investigator. So if I had to choose one place for my bucket list, ah. All right. So okay, I'll add a couple places. There's Warwick Castle in England outside of London.
Mm-hmm.
Love that place. And it is haunted to the rafters. There's also a place that I learned about while I was doing research for Gone on Vacation Endless Summer. And that is a place in London called the Ragged School Museum. There was a fellow who, in the Victorian era, he was a Scotsman. No, I'm sorry. He was an Irishman who came to London to study to be a priest, and he was going to be a missionary in China. And this was in the late Victorian era, and he was on the East End of London, and Scotland. Oh yeah, pretty much anywhere in Scotland. So he was in the East End of London and saw these children begging, and he saw the cholera.
Yep, we're glitching again. I think the storm is starting to roll in. Hopefully she'll come back in here in a second.
I'm waiting to come back. There we go.
There we go.
Okay, so he said, I'm needed much more here in the east side of London, east end of London, than I am in China. So he put together what he called ragged schools, and he educated these street urchins for free. He fed them, he clothed them, he taught them a trade, and this helped raise so many children out of the abject poverty they were living in Victorian London. And they actually did put together. They rescued the last warehouse that was still standing. It was in danger of being demolished, and they put together, the Historical Society put together the Ragged School Museum. So that would be a wonderful place to visit.
Sounds interesting. Definitely so. And now, one of the last questions. What is one thing you would change in the paranormal field?
Oh, don't be so precious about your evidence. If you have something cool, let everybody see it. And it would be really nice. We talk about paranormal unity, and instead there's so much backbiting about whose techniques are the best and who goes to the coolest places and who gets the coolest evidence, and oh, I don't want to play with your team because of something you said 5 years ago. And
Right.
just play nice. None of us are experts, and we're all in it to learn, and just let everyone learn.
I definitely agree with that. I think we should share more things and get along better with each other. And like I said, I've met a lot of great people doing this podcast and being out in the field. And,
Yeah.
I got to meet you guys here just a few weeks ago. I missed you.
I was at a book signing on Saturday, and you were there on Saturday. I was there on Sunday, but we
seen David and Doc, and
yeah.
I got to meet those guys and sat there with them for about 4 hours and chit-chatted with them.
Cool.
But this weekend, you have something coming up. What is it?
Yes, I have an author fair at the Brimfield Library in Brimfield, Illinois. I'll be there from 10 to 2. And then coming up, I have on April 25th, there's a wonderful event in Roscoe, Illinois, up by Rockford, and it's called the Dead Guy Festival.
Mm-hmm.
And I am going to be doing I put together a brand new presentation for this particular event. I did the Donnelly talk last year at the Dead Guy Festival, but I've put together a new talk, and it's stories from grave deeds and dead plots. So it's I think it's like 8 or 9 stories that I'll tell in the space of an hour or so.
That's awesome. Well, I'm going to say this. Thank you, Sylvia, for coming on the show tonight. It's been great
My
talking.
pleasure.
And who knows, when she goes to Brimfield next week for her book signing, you might see me pop up too.
Very good.
Because I'm definitely going to check out one of those books, and I definitely want you to sign it.
Will do.
So, any other things you'd like to say before we go off the air tonight, Sylvia?
Oh, well, if people are interested in what I do, you can visit sylviaschultz.com. That's SHULTS. On my page, there are links to my books. There are links to the YouTube version of my podcast, Lights Out. And I just have a really good time.
That's awesome. Like I said, thank you again for stopping in and talking with us tonight, and looking forward to see you next weekend.
Sounds good.
All right, I'm going to drop you backstage, Sylvia.
Okay.
Yeah, that was Sylvia Schultz. She is an author and a paranormal investigator with the Heart of Illinois Center of Unexplained Phenomena. Great group of people. Definitely go check out their stuff. Definitely go check out Sylvia's books as well. And next week, we have NSPS TV podcast host Terry, and his co-host will be here next weekend. So we're looking forward to having them. Everybody have a great week, rest of your weekend. I'm out of here. Bye.